I've got the top 300 players for the upcoming fantasy baseball season coming up next on Beat the Odds. Don't go anywhere. Hello, sports fans, and welcome back to another episode of Beat the Odds. I'm going to count down the top 300 best players in fantasy baseball leading up to the start of the Major League Baseball season. If you like this type of content, please smash that like button, and a special thanks goes to all of our subscribers who have been watching these videos, as you now account for almost 20% of all viewers. To the other 80% of viewers that haven't yet subscribed, I encourage you to do so, as it helps me create these videos for you. Since I won't be able to discuss all 300 players at length in this episode, if there is a specific player that I haven't covered that you want me to talk about, I encourage you to let me know in the comment section below. Now, this episode is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy Sports. Use the promo code BEATTHEODDS to double your first deposit up to $250. And first-time users get a free square. Like last Tuesday, if you bet on LeBron to score 1 point and he did, then you win. Now, this list is going to be broken down by position. I'm going to offer a few players that I think you should reach for in your drafts, as well as a few players that you should fade. The best players have already been covered on my top 10 list for each position, and you can find them on my playlist by clicking this link above. Now, let's start this off here with some catchers. In most 12-team leagues, rostering one catcher is suffice. But if your league contains 2 catcher spots, or if you're playing in a rotisserie format that has a cap for games played, then you may have to scout a little deeper for a second backstop. Let's take a look at some of the catchers that I'm reaching for this year. First off is Henry Davis. After splitting time at catcher and outfield last season, the former number 1 pick is slated to be Pittsburgh's number 1 catcher this season. He didn't fare all that well at the major league level last year, but he has a career .947 OPS in the minors, and he presents a sneaky speed element that could get him 15 bags this year. Next, I like Logan O'Hoppe. He's going to be here for his bat. O'Hoppe barreled balls in the top 90th percentiles in limited at-bats last season, and that resulted in 14 long balls and less than 200 plate appearances. The Angels are going to be desperate for offense, so O'Hoppe may get some extra at-bats at DH this year as well. One other catcher that I like is Keibert Ruiz. Like O'Hoppe, Ruiz's bat will likely play a role on the Washington squad. The team has him slotted third, which is usually the spot in the lineup that is saved for the team's most potent hitter. I would expect Ruiz to log 500 at-bats with great counting stats at the position. Now, some of the catchers that I'm fading are Wilson Contreras. There was some drama with the elder Contreras last season that pushed him to many leagues' waiver wire. This incurs a little more risk that I'm willing to pay for a player when there are great options that I can get later on in the draft. Another catcher that I'm fading is going to be Salvador Perez. No knock against Perez. He has had a phenomenal career to this point. He's also slotted to back cleanup on an up-and-coming Royals team. My issue is simply that we've seen a steady decline in his OPS over the last 3 seasons, so I would not be surprised to see it dip below 700 this year. And finally, as another fade, I've got Francisco Alvarez. From a pure power standpoint, Alvarez has it. He could easily lead the position in home runs this season if given the opportunity. The Mets are retooling, so they will pay close attention to both the good, which is Alvarez's power, and the bad, which is his plate discipline, to see where he's going to actually fit in their future plans. To first baseman we go. Grabbing a solid first baseman is key since the position isn't the wealth of power that it used to be. It may not be a bad idea to try and grab a bona fide top 5 first baseman, so that way you won't need to worry about trying to fill the spot later on in the draft. Looking at this list here, I would try to grab Brandon Drury and Justin Turner. Both are going to be hitting in great spots in the lineup. They both have multi-positional eligibility, and they should both be able to make some decent production for their teams. I would guess that 80 runs batted in would not be out of the question for either, provided they can get past the 500 at-bat threshold for the season. Now, I'm no longer high on Chris Bryant. I'm prepared to eat my words if he turns back the clock to his Cubs days, but the advanced stats would keep me from betting on it. He's just not connecting on pitches, plus he's been ravaged by injuries of late. Let someone else take that risk. One name from this list that I would run with is Vinny Pasquantino. We have yet to see what this behemoth can do in the majors, and he's slated to hit directly behind Bobby Witt Jr. Talk about some easy RBI opportunities all season long. Now, I'm going to be staying away from Nate Lau. He's going to be an everyday player on a great offensive team, but if he ends up being your number 1 first baseman on your team, you're going to have to make up for the power and counting stats that he's going to be struggling to provide. On to the keystone, let's look at some second basemen. There's a lot more value here than in years past, so missing out on a key second baseman won't sink your draft. This is a great spot to target some power speed combo players that will really help out your squad. Looking at this list, there's a couple names that I would target. The first is Zach Geloff. A's fans are going to have very little to be excited about this season, but Geloff may catch some waves. He's a young, talented player that can provide a 2020 season, and if he can make some strides on his plate discipline, he could be the A's lone representative at the Midsummer Classic. The next that I would target is Jorge Polanco. Does he have 30 home runs in his bag still? Probably not, but he could grab 90 RBIs hitting third in the Seattle lineup behind the one Julio Rodriguez. Polanco can be found past round 20 in most drafts, so if he's sticking around in yours at that point, I'd grab him. The one name that I would fade from this list is Jonathan India. Reds fans might be quick to forget the former Rookie of the Year with the influx of exciting infielders that have come up this past season. And there's more on the way, making me think that India is going to be in a timeshare this season unless he gets traded. Now, I do like Stott from this list. I think that he's a professional hitter that can get on base, steal a bag, and he should be able to give you 15 home runs this season. He will have trouble cracking the top third of the lineup, but if anything happens to the players in those spots, Stott would be next in line. I'm going to be fading both Ketel Marte and Luis Arraez from this list. I've covered Marte in my fades video, but to recap, he's coming off a solid year, which for some reason usually leads to a down year. And I'm not going to get fooled by that again. As for Arraez, as exciting as it was to see him push for 400 early on in the season, he lacks both power and speed, so unless you're in a points league, you'll find that his batting average help will not make up for his deficiencies elsewhere. Let's take a look at some shortstops. Like second base, shortstop is a top-heavy position this season. There are 9 shortstops that crack the top 75 players in the league. There's no other infield position that can boast that. So from this first list, I'm picking Jackson Holliday. Even if he doesn't make the team out of spring training, a feat made even more unlikely with Gunnar Henderson's oblique injury, Holliday makes a premium stash candidate. He's the number 1 prospect entering the league, and he could pay huge dividends down the stretch. Now, I'm going to be passing up on Trevor Story. Now, I like a great story, but I'm not buying Trevor's. Like Chris Bryant's, I could end up eating my words if he reverts back to his Rockies form, but his plate discipline has all but disappeared, which is very troubling for any player, much less one that's been in the league for as long as Story has. Now, I like Tovar off this list, who I highlighted as one of my sleepers this season. He's a quality defensive shortstop that's going to get as much playing time as he can handle. He's currently slotted in as the number 6 player in the lineup, but I see that changing for the better as the season goes on. If I were to fade someone on this list, it must be Elly De La Cruz. If he drops to the 5th round, then I'll take a look, but I'm not planning to spend a top pick for someone that is as likely to produce at a second round level as he is to find himself back in the minors by June. Moving on to the hot corner, let's take a look at some third basemen. There are some solid options at third base this season, unlike seasons prior, so grabbing a top 5 player at this position isn't really required. From this list, give me a full season of Jake Burger as the big bat in the Marlins order. He has 40 homer upside and will be featured in that lineup with Jorge Soler gone. He's sneaky fast, but I'm kind of over dreaming of him stealing double-digit bags, I think. I like Yoan Moncada again this season. He has been forgotten in most fantasy circles due to some underwhelming season, but he's still just 28 and he's going to be hitting in a great spot in that lineup. If Moncada can keep his K rate under 25%, then there is some good value to be had here. Now, I don't really know why the Reds decided to give Candelario a shot on their team. He did have a resurgent season last year, but I can't see how giving him the everyday third base spot will help this team full of young talent ready to contribute. If Jaime struggles out of the gates, look out. Now, from this list, having Nolan as the 9th third baseman selected is criminal. He's going to hit cleanup. He's going to likely give you a 30-homer, 100 RBI season. He's just not the sexy pick that he used to be, but that's okay. There aren't many players going after Arenado that I feel comfortable saying has the chance to surpass his numbers for this year. Now, I could be convinced that Arenado is going to have a better season than Manny Machado, for example. I'd have a hard time pulling the trigger on Machado in the 5th round than Arenado in the 8th. Machado's RBI is likely going to be taking a hit with Juan Soto's on-base percentage skills now in New York City. All right, let's move on to outfielders. There's a lot to like here with elite players up and down the top 10 selections and some great value to be had as you get deeper in the draft. Now let's start with the back end of the draft. I would be happy to give young Hoo Lee a shot on my team. He has hit .340 for his career in the KBO, which of course there are questions to see how that's going to translate in the MLB, but the Giants inked him for 6 years and $113 million to find out. Now I'm going to be passing on Giancarlo Stanton. He is the epitome of why teams in great markets struggle to make noise in their respective leagues. Yes, he can still hit 450-foot bombs, but you're going to have to deal with awful supportive stats to go along with it. At least the Yankees are smart and are considering batting him 7th this year. From this list, Jarren Duran could end up being the steal of the draft this season. He's a talented young player that's going to be given a shot at hitting leadoff for the Red Sox. He could give you an 800 OPS with 15 homers and 100-plus runs, plus who knows how many stolen bases he can get with his 96th percentile sprint speed. And I must take a pass on Starling Marte. Getting him in the later rounds of the draft is not an awful way to go, but if you're reaching into the middle rounds to get him, you're paying too much for a player that would not be worth the roster spot if he didn't have speed to count on. And recent groin injuries have me questioning even that. Now, I'm going to be hunting Jackson Chourio in every league that I draft. He gives me the 2018 Ronald Acuna vibes, and it wouldn't surprise me if Chourio posts the .293 average, 78 runs, 26 homers, 64 runs batted in, 16 stolen base line that we got from Acuna back then. The Brewers believe in him, and they have 82 million reasons to let him run with the center field position. Now, I am 100% fading Esteury Ruiz. There is no reason in this day and age of fantasy baseball where you feel the need to draft a player in the middle rounds whose only real skill is to steal bags. I don't care if he gets 100 deaths this season, he's going to give you almost nothing else. Draft better and get stolen bases elsewhere. There's a lot of quality outfielders to get once the first 20 have come off the board, but I'm buying on Jordan Walker. He is going to hit, and he's going to hit well. We haven't seen his power potential yet because he's only 21. He could be my dark horse for 40 homers this season if everything pans out for him. Now, I don't think I can safely buy in on Cedric Mullins anymore. His 2021 breakout season is a clear outlier of his skill set. Since then, he has shown us a sea of blue for every major category on StatCast, just like he had done in the years prior to his breakout. There are much safer players to bet on around pick 120. Now, I encourage you to watch my Top 10 Outfielders episodes where I detail many of the players on this list. And this may surprise some, but I have been keeping an eye on how far Mike Trout has been falling in recent drafts. He's a great pickup after round 6 if the fear of injury grips your league's drafters. A 900 OPS is certainly not out of the question. As for fading, I would be disappointed if I had to pay a third-round tag to get Michael Harris II. He will struggle all year to put a third-round value on a team that's so stacked that it would be impossible for Harris to crack the top 3 spots in the lineup. He's a great talent, but until he becomes a featured player, I'm going to pass. Moving on to starting pitchers, there doesn't seem to be many impactful pitchers this season, and it may be prudent to select one of the elite starters early to feel secure about the position. Now, before we get to those, let's see who you can find at the end of your draft. Now, there isn't much to select from here, but if I wanted to grab a player from this list, it might be Brian Bello. There has been talk about a revamped slider that Bello is planning to use this season, and that has me intrigued enough to spend a pick at the end of the draft for him. I'm going to be fading Emmett Sheehan. He was useful in the latter part of the last season, but I don't see him in the rotation once Walker Buehler returns to the mound. Unless the team runs 6 deep in the rotation, I really don't see a whole lot of value here. Now, from this list, Ryan Pepiot might outrank Tyler Glasnow this season. Think about that for a minute. Now, I'm likely wrong, but it's not too far-fetched to think that it could never happen. I'm of course banking this take on the fact that Glasnow struggles to get to the finish line, and that Pepiot carries his career .276 ERA and .109 WHIP into a useful season for the Rays. Now, I like this next team, but I really don't like the pitcher. I'm talking about Charlie Morton. A 1.43 WHIP simply does not play for somebody who you need to give 160 plus innings to. He's going to get his wins because of run support, not because of his talent. I'm steering clear from him, and so should you. There's a clear bounce back candidate on this list in Carlos Rodon, but I'm actually buying more shares of Michael King. There might be some bias here given how I watched helplessly as my Blue Jays floundered against King down the stretch last season, but regardless, his stuff is nasty and he should translate well for the Padres. On the flip side, I'm passing on King's teammate Yu Darvish. He threw 8 different pitches last season, but only 2 of them, his curveball and his splitter, would have been considered effective pitches. His slider, which was his bread and butter pitch in the past, batters hit .431 against it last season. He's on the brink of obscurity this year. Now, I could do an episode on the San Diego rotation on its own, as there would be a lot to cover heading into this season. I would talk about how I'm big on Joe Musgrove this year. He doesn't overpower you with a high 90s fastball, but he's going to be a gem at inducing weak contact and limiting walks, which will keep the Friars in many games this year. Do I believe the hype on Grayson Rodriguez? Yes, he is the real deal. Is he worth a pick in round 5? I can't really say that with certainty. His effectiveness as a starter is going to hinge on how he will be able to command that massive fastball that he has. The fact that hitters hit .342 off of it last season leaves a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. Now, I'd recommend watching my top starting pitchers episode to see how I rank some of the best pitchers in the game. I'm going to provide the link for you here. As for a pitcher that I'm gunning for in this list, it would be Corbin Burnes. I think out of the top 3 pitchers, you'll get the best return from Burnes. He's worth a second round pick, as I feel that the talent level drops off once he's chosen from the board. He should be able to carry your team's pitching stats all season long. And I'm afraid to own Aaron Nola this season. I think third round value is a ceiling for him, and I tend not to draft players that I can't see getting value from. I'd be much happier bagging Musgrove in the 10th round than grabbing Nola in the 3rd, especially when I feel like they will have similar seasons this year. Now let's talk relief pitchers next. If you plan on chasing saves, as you should, it would be important to grab a couple of elite relievers. Not only will you be able to shore up the saves category, but you should also be able to benefit from better K9 rates, better ERA, and WHIP numbers from your quality relievers. Now let's take a look at a few. I really like Tanner Scott this season. The lefty has a power fastball and an absolute wipeout slider that hitters hit a measly 173 against last season. And what makes matters even better is that Scott wasn't plagued by the free pass last season, walking a respectable 7.8% of the batters that he faced. Now I'm passing on Alex Lange. Why? For the same reason I'm in on Tanner Scott, that being his walk percentage. Lange was in the bottom 1% in walk percentage last year's walking batters in 15.6% of his plate appearances. Jason Foley is sitting in the wings and would be my preferred reliever on this Tiger squad. Now I'm plugging in Pete Fairbanks to as many squads as possible this season. He's often overlooked as one of the premier closers in this league, even though his profile clearly suggests that he should be. Assuming a healthy season from him, I would expect Fairbanks to be firmly among the top 10 closers this year. Now I'm okay not picking up Paul Seward this year. Currently going around the top 100 players, I find that price too steep to pay for someone I'm not convinced will have the job by the end of the year. I think there was a reason that Seattle was able to part with Seward, knowing that Andres Munoz was ready to run with the closing gig. Munoz, by the way, can be had 40 picks later in the draft. And for those who made it this far, you may have noticed that we haven't yet talked about possibly the biggest impact player in the league this year, that being Shohei Ohtani. He's the only DH on my top 300 list, and as such, he deserves a little love on this episode. Now, Shohei can be had near the end of the first round in many drafts. Although his superstardom knows no bounds, picking him up does present a bit of a challenge in some leagues because of one simple reason. He doesn't have a position. He must be slotted in a util spot in your batting lineup. Yes, he's a good bet for 110 runs, 40 homers, 110 runs batted in, and 15 stolen bases, hitting in the top third of arguably the most potent offense in baseball, but he won't be able to contribute those stats to a position, meaning that you'll likely be behind the 8 ball all draft long to make sure that you can field a strong team around Shohei. If I can get him in round 2, then I'm pulling the trigger, as the sky is the limit for him, but I won't be selecting Shohei Ohtani early in the first round. And that's going to do it here for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video and of course subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I am going to sign off for now, but I will catch you guys on my next episode.